In understanding the I Ching, it is important to know its history. Legend has it that the first emperor of China, Fu Xi, and brother of Nu Hua, invented the I Ching, or perhaps discovered it, after observing a turtle, or sometimes a dragon, emerge from a river. He saw the lines of the turtle or the spots on the dragon, and from that wrote down the 8 trigrams. And he supposedly lived around 3000 BC, meaning the first written down foundation of the I Ching is almost 5,000 years old. There have been found hundreds of thousands of turtle shells that bear different sort of I Ching writings on them. So it is very possible that the claromancy behind the I Ching has been going on in China thousands of years before Fu Xi wrote them down. Likely starting off in live turtles before later renditions of it where they would heat up turtle shells and observe the different lines that would form from cracking. But it wasn't until towards the end of the Shang dynasty when King Wen developed the 64 hexagrams by combining the 8 trigrams. And he did this while he was in prison. And his son, Tan of Chao, would go on to write down lines or notes describing each hexagram. And this would have been about 1000 BC. And finally, in about 500 BC, Confucius and his disciples wrote down the I Ching as a book. And this is the one that we have today. In terms of bringing the I Ching to the West, the most important names are Richard Wilhelm and Carl Jung. Richard Wilhelm studied under a Confucian master and eventually gave a German translation. And Carl Jung, who was fascinated by the I Ching, wrote the introduction and gave what were his thoughts of the I Ching oracle. Aside from the ancient turtle divination, the oracle is usually divined using yarrow stalks. Popular as well are coins. I would argue that the I Ching is the most significant work produced by humans ever. And the I Ching is a paradox. It describes the universe, it describes changes, and it is a logic system, a binary count of 64, and also it has no defined meanings. It is ever evolving and ever changing. It is organic, and it describes a very organic universe. It's like a choose your own adventure novel with the mathematical structure of the universe encoded into it. The usability and the influence of the I Ching is pervasive in every facet of society, from emperor to peasant, from the greatest thinkers like Confucius, Lao Tzu, and Carl Jung, and even musicians like Bob Dylan, Pink Floyd, and the Beatles, and my particular fascination, which is to read faces through analytical physiognomy of the I Ching. That's a good observation, and I'm going to explain how the emotional type system works. In total, there are 64 emotional types. Each emotional type corresponds with one hexagram of the I Ching. Each hexagram of the I Ching has its own characteristics and qualities. They're basically like archetypes. So the I Ching is called the canon of changes. It's basically documenting the cyclical nature of life itself, of the universe, of energy, of the yin and yang. Each line is either yin or yang. Broken lines are yin, while the unbroken lines are yang. And an individual hexagram is composed of 2 trigrams. But for the emotional types, we actually break it up into 3 digrams. The top 2 lines of a hexagram are your eyebrows, the middle 2 are your eyes, and the bottom 2 is your mouth. There are 4 possible settings for each individual feature, your brow, your eyes, or your mouth. The 4 possible emotions for each feature are closed, joyful, open, and sad. Even though this is a binary system, there are actually 4 different combinations. Each line has a different meaning based off of the line that it's next to. So in total, the mathematics works out to 64. This is actually the same sort of technology equation that computers used. Most of them use binary system of 64-bit processing. So the I Ching itself is basically like an ancient computer. But there is actually another system that's more fundamental to life itself. And I'm talking about DNA. DNA has 64 possible combinations from the 4 different nucleotides. So the I Ching is basically a flawless system that's running the same software as DNA itself. But it doesn't stop there, because there's an even more fundamental mathematic geometric equation than DNA. Encoded in the hexagrams of the I Ching is this shape, the 64 tetrahedron. Buckminster Fuller called this the most accurate conceptualization of the universe. Basically, this is like a geometrically perfect shape that has every other single sacred geometric, mathematical principle, esoteric symbol. So it gets into some pretty crazy stuff, but the I Ching can be used for a lot of things, and it's equivalent to a lot of things and encoded into a lot of things. But we are just trying to focus on the faces for now. So I'll explain more in part 2. Part 2 of the emotional types explanation. So I've already done a few faces, and I will continue to do more. I'll try to get as many as people comment, either for themselves or for suggestions that they have, or just faces that I see that are interesting that I feel like doing. And obviously I'm not going to do anyone that doesn't ask for it, other than like another creator, and I will obviously take anything down if you don't want to be used for a reading. But anyways, back to the explanation. So I mentioned how they're basically like personality archetypes. You could compare it to like the Myers-Briggs, except the I Ching is far more comprehensive, and you can actually find someone's Myers-Briggs through the I Ching emotional types. And keep in mind that the emotional types face reading is like level 1 of this stuff. It gets way more complex, and it just gets more mind-boggling and more interesting the more you look into it. So we're just sticking with the simple stuff, the simple emotional type archetypes, and how your facial features, the contours of those features, determine all these qualities about your personality, about your extroversion and introversion and thoughts and outlook on life. And ultimately, if you're trying to psychoanalyze someone completely, you would use everything at your disposal. So you would use Myers-Briggs, you would use emotional types, and you would just use any quality or subject that you could find of a personality of someone to get a good idea of someone's life and someone's personality. Here are my poorly rendered drawings for the examples of the emotional types. On the left, we have open. It's the arched brows, the wide, innocent-looking eyes, and the open mouth. Next to this is closed, which is flat, kind of narrow, flat mouth. Over here, we have joyful, which is that really like, obviously, my face isn't like that, so I can't like do it, but you see it's just that contour up, and that smile. And then you have sad, which is the opposite, that contour down, and that kind of frown. And then obviously it's the combination of these features with their hexagram or diagram equivalent at the top here. So someone could have closed eyebrows, joyful eyes, and sad mouth, and then you would just, from the eyebrows starting at the top 2, eyes middle 2, and mouth bottom 2. And I'm not trying to be too confusing with this, but technically you would need to make sure the face is actually symmetrical. Many people have 2 different emotional types, one on the left side and one on the right side, which adds some complexity to this, but all human faces fall into this pattern.
Helen's eyes that are communicating the gravity of the situation. It's something beyond.
So in that video, he talks about the actor's ability to communicate through the eyes. And this is something that can easily be explained through the emotional types. Here I sketched out 4 different of the emotional types that are the most congruent, meaning the eyebrows, the eyes, and the mouth are all set to the same emotion, which corresponds to the 1st, 2nd, 63rd, and 64th hexagrams of the I Ching. Now this is a perfect time to elaborate on the time qualities of emotional types. So when you are in the present moment, your features become open. This is why when there's something shocking happening, your jaw drops, right? Your mouth is in the open expression because it's in the present. It's presently feeling what's happening. Same thing for the eyebrows and the eyes. If someone asks you a question, you might raise your eyebrows to signify that you're in the present and you're listening to their ideas. Now, when your features are in the joyful expression here, as we can see, it is very much working towards that goal, right? When you're angry, when you're happy, when you have a quest or a goal or a mission you're trying to do or trying to accomplish, your features become joyful. Now, when you are dwelling on the past, when you are thinking sad things, your emotional expressions become sad. They oriented towards down. That's why you frown when you're sad. And finally, for the closed emotions, they are outside of time. You don't have any of that present, future, or past tense. It's very much just daydreaming, kind of thinking of something else. You're just not feeling, you're not thinking, and you're not desiring anything in the moment. And now humans, we go between all of these different emotional types. Some people, they're set to different emotional types of the whole 64. And so in one conversation, you may, let's say you're the third hexagram of the I Ching. In one conversation, you may go through 10 different emotional types. It's all just based off of your expressions. And so for a movie or TV show or even in real life, someone's facial expressions need to match what they're doing. If you want to have an honest portrayal, if you want to have a relatable and understandable portrayal of what's happening in the narrative. So if you have a quest, you need to look like this. If you're looking for revenge, or even if you're happy and you're looking forward to the future, you will look more like this. If something bad happens and you can't handle it and it's really tragic and it's really sad, you might look like that. If something shocking happens, something urgent happens, you need to tell someone right away, you're going to look like that. And finally, if you're off in another land in your head, you're daydreaming, you're not thinking about events, you're just passively kind of going through things in your own little world, you might look like that. So we all have different combinations of these that are set to our default. Maybe it's your ideas, maybe it's your desires, and maybe. All right, so part two of the time qualities of emotional types. So I mentioned that the relatability of a show or performance is determined based off of the correct emotional type in the situation for the character within the narrative. As an example, if you were in like a business meeting and you were presenting a whatever project and you had this kind of facial expression going on, it would be that you're in the past, you're thinking sad thoughts, you're in the mournful kind of emotional expression. And so nobody's going to listen to you, no one's going to take you seriously. You need to look more like this because that means you're oriented towards the future, and that's for the context of business what you want to be doing, what you want to be displaying. Inversely, if there's like a sad scene or something tragic happened and you're trying to show that it's affecting you, you need to look more like this rather than oriented towards the future and the joyful emotional expressions. And again, these are just the four kind of extremes of the I Ching emotional expressions when we have different um, spread and combination of the different emotional types as our default, and we switch between them as we talk, as we relate to information, as we see information and process it. So a show's success or a performance's success is determined by the correct application of emotional types. For the most part, this is going on subconsciously, but if you actually learn this system, you can know how to manipulate it. So you can use it to defy expectations, to have characters that are really going to turn out evil and they're tricking you with the wrong kind of emotional expression. You can have someone present themselves as honest, but their actual emotional expression maybe is something like this in the future, and they have an ulterior motive. Now, the reason why this is so important is to understand the actual physicality of emotions and the emotional expressions. The mind and the body are physical expressions and impressions of your emotions, of what you feel, what you think, what you desire. So your sort of default emotional expression can change over time, and the canon of changes can document that through your changing emotional expressions, maybe over a lifetime or maybe just from situation to situation. Remember, our eyes are filters, they're only seeing a few different things. We're missing most of the spectrums of light and we're missing the microbial. And this is why you can pick up on people's intentions by merely looking at them. You can tell if someone's going to approach you or if someone's going to want to hurt you or if someone is disgusted by you without even knowing what they're saying. You pick up on kind of what you would think of as metaphysical emotions and expressions and thoughts, when really we're just interpreting the emotional types. So, a channel called Polygon made a video saying that personality is through shape language. And then they go on and giving some examples of different shapes and the characters that the shape suggests. It's one of their pinned videos, so you can check out the whole thing if you want to. However, in this video, we are going to be disproving shape theory. So here I created two different sets of characters. All of them are triangles. Now, the triangle or any other shape doesn't suggest anything about their personality or what kind of character they are. All of the personality of a character you're seeing is through their emotional types, through their facial features. Now, I want you to try to figure out which side is good and which side is evil, and you can pause it if you need a moment to try to decide. The only correct answer to that question is you can't actually know. A character's particular personality is determined based on their emotional type and how it interacts with the environment around them. Now, let's give my characters arms and legs. So, body shape means nothing about their personality. However, there are other psychological components to different body parts. For example, an emphasis on legs, having strong legs or showing a lot of skin for legs reveals that they are more community, more active, more extroverted, while an emphasis in arms indicates they are more worried about themselves. So you think arms are internal and legs are external. So body shape, body type, ethnicity, bone structure, none of that has anything to do with the type of character that you have. I could have made these guys squares and these guys circles, and you would have learned nothing new from that. And now we've given our characters weapons. And still, you don't know much about these characters other than their kind of general emotion and feel. And now these guys on the left have a king, and these guys on the right have a sort of bandit leader. As I said, their personality is determined by their emotional type and how those features are interacting with their environment, with the story, and with what those characters are doing. So you've got like a guy with a wand, some throwing knives, a magic book, nunchucks, shield, a bow, and that's all going to give them different kind of character type personalities. Versus these guys have spear, axe, a club, a sword, a pitchfork, and these like claw things. Now observe what happens when the narrative gives you the good and evil. This guy now looks like a Robin Hood sort of character who's trying to lead his people into a better life against a tyrant king who maybe has the right intentions but ends up doing all the wrong things. We could easily switch that narrative, and now the king, he looks overly concerned for his people, while these guys look like scheming thieves. And so you see, it has nothing to do with their shape, but it is the narrative within their emotional type. So we are going to try to read the emotional type of Angelina Jolie. Now, actors and actresses are really difficult to read their emotional type because they're constantly changing their face. Now, that ability to change your face makes them really good actors or actresses for being in versatile and diverse roles. Although, of course, there are some actors who don't have as dynamic of faces, and they're usually typecasted into being the same role. And if you look at her face, it seems to be different every single image you look at. Because of that reason, we're going to use a different method of reading her emotional type, which we can do using her astrological birth chart. So here is her birth chart, and I overlaid it with just a circle that has all the degree points. And what we want to do is find the sun and the moon, which will be 46 degrees for the sun, and the moon is 341 degrees. The starting point being at 0 degrees here with Aries. Now, in order to calculate the I Ching emotional type with the astrological birth chart, we're going to divide 360 by 64, which is the number of I Ching hexagrams and the degrees in a circle. Now, after that, we're going to subtract 341 from 46, which is the degrees of the moon and the sun. And the number we get from that is 295. So now that we have 295, we're going to divide it by 5.625. our algorithm number. That number comes out as 52.4444, and that equates to the 53rd hexagram of the I Ching. Since there's no zero hexagram, the first hexagram is 1. And so the 53rd hexagram is closed eyebrows, sad eyes, and open mouth. Now, I did find some images of her where she's actually displaying that emotional type. And this would be her actual emotional type. We can see the closed eyebrows, sad eyes, and open mouth. Here's another image where you can see the facial features a little bit better. And so from that process, we can see how she's changed her face and overall what that does to her face, which for the most part allows her to play in a lot of different roles and project different emotional types. Now, to be thorough, normally we would do every single planet and put it into the calculation to see which of her emotional types she's going to be expressing the most. But ultimately, the moon has to do more with your emotions and the emotional expressions that we get through her I Ching and her archetype, her sort of hexagram archetype. And the 53rd hexagram is infiltrating, which is basically slowly extending your influence into everything. Today we're going to read the face of Keanu Reeves through his birth chart. I've already lined up the planets and their degrees and calculated all of his hexagrams by using the formula, and I have them down here. I'm not going to go through that again because there's some other things we need to talk about. So your moon is going to be your emotional type, and the planets are going to be other emotions that you are more suited for. This will make sense in a second. But firstly, let's look at his emotional type, the 56th hexagram. And this is the 56th hexagram. So before we even see his face, we know what it's generally going to look like because we have his hexagram emotional type. And so he's going to have joyful eyebrows, quiet eyes, and open mouth. That's his sort of resting face. We have open mouth, quiet eyes, and joyful eyebrows. The eyebrows being for the future, the closed eyes being outside of time, and the open mouth being present feelings. You can see it again just to confirm that open mouth, joyful eyebrows, and quiet eyes. Quick reminder, the joyful eyebrows are contoured up, the quiet eyes are kind of closed off and narrow, and the open mouth is just that. Taking another look at his reading, we can see the 56th hexagram shows up in Mars and Venus, which kind of just reinforces that as being a strong emotional type of his and his kind of resting emotional type. It's one he's well suited in a lot of different situations, and being in context of an actor means good for those kinds of roles. So Mercury, Venus, and Uranus, we see the first hexagram showing up 3 times. So we would imagine this is going to be a significant emotional type for him. The first hexagram is pure yin. It's all closed off, closed eyebrows, closed eyes, and closed mouth. And where do we see that? In one of his most famous roles in The Matrix, in which the eyes and eyebrows are closed off, and the feelings are as well. And because of his alignments and that being part of his emotional type, he's well suited to having his features closed off and it working for him as a character and in the role of the movie. You essentially want to line up your emotional types with the kind of role you want to do, whether it's movies or real life. The more convincing you are in your role is determined by your correct emotional type expression. We have time for one more. Let's take a look at Neptune, the 14th hexagram. And here is the 14th hexagram, joyful, quiet, quiet. And here he is in the movie Constantine, where his eyebrows are joyful, his desires and feelings are quiet. His ideas were in the future because he was after something, while his desires and feelings were outside of time as he was trying to save his soul ultimately. Using analytical physiognomy and the emotional types of the I Ching, we can actually do something that's pretty cool. We can take a look at ancient depictions of gods and goddesses from throughout the world and find out their archetypes. For this, we are going to look at fertility goddesses. This is the fertility goddess Ishtar from Babylonian mythology. We can see she has open eyebrows, open eyes, and joyful mouth. This is thought to be the Night Mother or Lilith, And we have the same emotional type: open eyebrows, open eyes, and joyful mouth. This is Isis from Egyptian mythology. We have open eyebrows, open eyes, and joyful mouth. Sometimes the fertility goddess is depicted as Hathor, and again we have open eyebrows, open eyes, and joyful mouth. Here is Aphrodite with the same emotional type, and Venus with the same emotional type. Here is the Yoruban goddess Oshun with the same emotional type. And I know this is a modern artwork of that goddess, but we can assume that it probably fell into the same unconscious archetype. And the same goes for the Norse Freya. Even though we don't really have any ancient depictions of them, we can assume that these even more modern depictions are following that archetype and following it correctly. Parvati of Hinduism, same emotional type. Even the fertility goddess equivalent of Christianity, Mary, follows the same emotional type. And here is the Aztec Coatlicue. This is perhaps the most stylistic fertility goddess, as her head was decapitated in her myth and replaced by two snake heads. In this old statue, the snake heads join together in the middle to kind of form a larger snake head that's facing forward. And we can see the joyful mouth, the open eyes, and the open eyebrows. And of course, there are many, many other examples I could have used for this specific fertility goddess archetype. The emotional type of these fertility figures is equated to the seventh hexagram, which is the legions. Now, legions is exactly how it sounds. It's like an army gathering to a commander. This gives us an interesting insight into the role of the fertility goddess, which can be thought of: this is how you produce your armies, this is how you grow your population, through that sense of fertility and childbirth. Now, the seventh hexagram is not a pure yin hexagram. There is one yang line. And if you notice, all of these goddesses, they usually have a counterpart, or they originate from older iterations of war goddesses. Perhaps you could think of it as the mother bear or mother lion protecting its young. The fertile mother is often the strongest of its species.